Well, for more on the climate change conference, CIEL Campaign Manager for Human Rights and Climate Change, Sebastien Duyck, joins me now from Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for his analysis on this issue. Good to have you with us on the news at this time. So, yes, there are concerns that the world isn't doing enough to cut down carbon emissions, and scientists say it is already too late to keep temperatures rising above 1.5 degrees. How worrying is this, even as world leaders meet to tackle climate change?
Well, we should be, and thank you for having me tonight, we should be extremely worried about the lack of progress, that's for sure. This is the 27th conference, and if previous conferences of the parties had delivered, we would not be having this conversation tonight. So I think it highlights the fact that there is a terrible gap between the information that scientists are collecting and reporting on and the amount of political will among politicians. The ray of hope is that even in the most severe scientific analysis, scientists keep highlighting that there is still a path forward through which we could keep temperatures below the most dense levels of increase. This only requires political will, and this is one thing that we can change. We cannot change, but we could change and mobilize political will in order to avoid the catastrophic events that are hitting all continents, and in particular, of course, Africa. We are running out of time. That's the key message from the UN Secretary General, for instance. But at the same time, we know that there are solutions on the table. We know what the solutions are, and we have a roadmap actually to achieve the emission reductions that are required to avoid the catastrophic climate change that will be irreversible, and that will also trigger tipping points that will imply large-scale damages across entire regions.
Yeah, and even though we know the solutions, the United Nations Secretary General recently just opened the summit with a message that our planet is sending a distress signal which calls for urgent and credible climate action. Now, what do you hope to see during the next 2 weeks of negotiations between countries on climate action?
Absolutely. We are very glad to see the UN Secretary General really losing patience and calling on governments to take this more seriously. We really need to see three different things. On mitigation, on the reduction of emissions of greenhouse gases, we absolutely need to see countries really mapping a way forward to actually increase the ambition of their current climate targets. Even if the current climate targets were fully implemented, this will still lead to a dramatic gap between this ambition for emission reductions by the end of 2030 and what scientists are actually asking us to do. Of course, these emission reductions need to be taking into account the principle of equity, the principle that developed countries must take the lead. In Glasgow last year, we saw the first reference to what is actually the problem of this crisis, which you also mentioned in your introduction, which is, of course, fossil fuel combustion. And so one thing that we hope to see during Sharm el-Sheikh is that actually governments are able to build on the recognition that fossil fuels are the main problem, and they are able to recognize more explicitly the need for them to rapidly phase out fossil fuel with developed countries taking the lead. You mentioned that we are in an energy crisis, and we as campaigner would like to stress that this is not so much an energy crisis as a fossil fuel crisis, actually. If we had embraced the transition to renewable energy across continents a few years ago, when scientists told us so, we would not see the energy crisis we are seeing right now. So perhaps this is an additional motivation factor to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuel. And in particular, for developed countries, no longer to focus on false solutions, carbon trading, exporting in a way their pollution to other countries, but really seeing developed countries rapidly polluting domestically and changing their production patterns. Very significantly also at this COP, particularly because it's a COP hosted in Africa, we are hoping to see progress on adaptation, because the decades of delays with the reduction of emissions of greenhouse gases means that right now a lot of countries around the world, across this continent, but also in Asia, for instance, we've seen Pakistan that has been terribly hit by floods earlier this summer. We see the need for adaptation action, and in developing countries, of course, adaptation actions need to be supported by financial support from the funds. to the third point, the third expectation is the key to unlock climate justice, but also to enable more mitigation actions in developing countries, that the provision of resources from developed countries, as they had committed for many, many years and decades. We hope to see developed countries deliver a credible path forward for the delivery of 100 billion of additional financial resources for mitigation and adaptation in the global south. But we also hope to see developed countries engage constructively in a discussion about what are the future targets for the provision of climate finance, because due to the lack of emission reductions, we've seen the impacts accelerating.
Sebastien Duyck, we appreciate your insights on the news at 10 tonight. Thanks a lot.